The smell of gunpowder lingered in the crisp mountain air as Jack Reynolds checked his rifle one final time. A legendary hunter with 30 years of experience, he had never encountered anything like the reports coming from Pine Valley. The massive bear they were tracking had already destroyed 3 cabins and killed dozens of livestock. Local farmers whispered about its unusual size and intelligence, calling it the ghost of the mountains. 4 other seasoned hunters joined Jack on this critical mission. Mike Thompson, a former forest ranger, knew every trail and hidden path in these woods. Brothers Steve and Tom Walker had been hunting bears since they were teenagers. Sarah Chen, the youngest of the group but an expert tracker, had studied bear behavior for years at the Wildlife Research Center. The hunters gathered at the forest edge well before sunrise. The October morning was unusually cold, their breath forming small clouds in the beam of their flashlights. They had planned this hunt for weeks, studying maps and recent bear sightings. This was not a regular hunting trip. The local authorities had commissioned them after the bear had become an increasing threat to the mountain communities. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the dense pine canopy, the group began their trek into the heart of the forest. The terrain quickly became challenging. Fallen logs covered in slick moss forced them to watch every step. The forest floor was soft from recent rains, perfect for tracking, but treacherous for walking. Sarah led the way, her trained eyes scanning for any signs of their target. 3 hours into their journey, they found the first evidence. A massive paw print pressed deep into the mud caught their attention. Sarah knelt beside it, her hand hovering over the impression. The print was fresh, no more than a few hours old, and its size made even Jack pause. It was nearly twice the size of a normal black bear's track. The destruction around them told an even more compelling story. Broken branches hung from trees, 12 feet high, marking the bear's path. Claw marks on tree trunks were unlike anything they had seen before. The bark was not just scratched, but deeply gouged, as if the bear was deliberately marking its territory. The forest grew denser as they followed the trail deeper into unexplored territory. The usual forest sounds began to fade. No birds sang in this part of the woods. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The silence was unnatural, pressing against their ears like a physical presence. Tom spotted the next sign. A half-eaten deer carcass lay hidden beneath some brush. The kill was recent, the ground still damp with blood. What struck them was not just the size of the bite marks, but the methodical way the deer had been taken down. This was no ordinary predator. The bear had shown tactical thinking, ambushing its prey from a perfect vantage point. The group moved forward with increased caution. The bear's trail led them toward a series of rocky outcrops. The terrain became more treacherous with each step. Loose rocks shifted under their boots, threatening to send them sliding down the steep incline. The mist that had been hovering near the ground all morning began to thicken, reducing visibility. Jack raised his hand, signaling the group to stop. In the eerie silence, they heard it. A deep sound halfway between a growl and a breath echoed off the rocks. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The hunters instinctively formed a tight circle, their rifles ready. Sarah pointed to a dark opening between 2 massive boulders. Fresh claw marks scored the rock face. The tracks led directly into the shadow of what appeared to be a cave entrance. The ground around it was torn up, as if the bear had been pacing, waiting. As they stood there analyzing their next move, an overwhelming sense of being watched crept over them. The mist swirled around their feet, thick enough now to obscure the ground. They were no longer just hunters on a mission. They had become prey themselves, stepping into the domain of something that defied their expectations of normal bear behavior. The cave entrance seemed to draw them in, promising answers but threatening danger. The hunt had only just begun, but already they sensed that this encounter would change everything they thought they knew about these powerful creatures. The cave entrance loomed before them like a dark mouth in the mountainside. Moisture dripped from overhead rocks, creating an endless rhythm in the silence. The hunters spread out, their boots crunching on scattered bones that littered the ground. These were not old kills. The freshness of the remains confirmed their worst fears about the bear's growing appetite. Sarah's LED flashlight beam caught something unusual on the cave wall. The claw marks here were different. They formed distinct patterns, almost like territorial warnings. Some were placed so high up that the bear must have stood on its hind legs, reaching heights of over 12 feet. This behavior showed an intelligence that made the hunters exchange worried glances. The deeper they ventured into the cave system, the more the temperature dropped. Their breath came out in visible puffs, dancing in the beams of their lights. The tunnel widened into a larger chamber, where they found something unprecedented. The bear had created what looked like a storage area. Partially eaten carcasses were deliberately placed in the coldest corner of the cave, preserved by the natural chill. This was not normal bear behavior. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, causing small stones to shift beneath their feet. The sound came from a tunnel branching off to their right. The hunters moved forward in formation, their training taking over despite their growing unease. The new passage sloped upward, leading them back toward the surface. Suddenly, Sarah froze. Her hand shot up, signaling immediate danger. Just ahead, the tunnel opened into another chamber, this one dimly lit by a hole in the ceiling. Through the opening, weak sunlight illuminated a scene that made their blood run cold. The chamber walls were covered in claw marks, but these were not random. They formed circular patterns, spreading out like a web across the rock face. Before they could process what they were seeing, a shadow moved against the far wall. The massive shape rose from behind a boulder, unfolding to its full height. The bear stood like a mountain of muscle and fur, its shoulders nearly touching the chamber ceiling. But it was the creature's eyes that held them paralyzed. They gleamed with an almost human intelligence, calculating and aware. Time seemed to stop as hunter and hunted faced each other. The bear's size defied belief. Its head alone was larger than a car tire, and its claws looked like curved daggers. A long scar ran down its right flank, evidence of past encounters with humans. This was no ordinary animal. This was something that had evolved, adapted, and learned. The standoff broke in an instant. The bear charged with shocking speed, moving like a freight train of fur and muscle. Jack fired first, his shot echoing through the chamber like thunder. The bullet found its mark, but the bear barely slowed. Tom and Steve fired next, their shots striking the bear's shoulder and side. The injured bear roared, the sound so powerful it shook loose stones from the ceiling. Instead of charging straight at them as expected, it suddenly changed direction. The bear crashed into the chamber wall with deliberate force, causing a cascade of rocks to fall between itself and the hunters. The tactical thinking was impossible to ignore. It was creating an escape route while blocking pursuit. Sarah shouted a warning as more rocks fell. The chamber was becoming unstable. The bear used this chaos to its advantage, smashing through a partially blocked tunnel that none of them had noticed. Despite its injuries, it moved with purpose and power. Blood marked its path, but the bear showed no sign of slowing. The hunters scrambled to follow, but the falling rocks forced them back. By the time they found a safe path around the cave-in, the bear had vanished into the forest. Only blood, trails, and massive paw prints remained, leading deeper into unknown territory. The prints showed the bear was now favoring its right side, where at least 2 bullets had found their mark. The group gathered around the blood trail, their adrenaline still pumping. The encounter had shaken their confidence. This was not the desperate charge of a cornered animal. The bear had shown strategy, using the cave's structure to its advantage. It had created an escape route while ensuring its pursuers would be delayed. Even more unsettling was the evidence they found in the chamber once the dust settled. Hidden behind where the bear had been resting, they discovered small carvings in the rock. They looked almost like markers or signs, deliberately placed and carefully spaced. The implications were impossible to ignore. This creature was not just surviving. It was thinking, planning, and possibly even marking its territory in ways they had never seen before. The blood trail led deeper into the forest's heart, where the trees grew so thick they blotted out the sky. The injured bear was now more dangerous than ever. Like any wounded predator, it would be desperate, but unlike any bear they had encountered before, it would also be cunning. The hunt was far from over. In fact, it was about to become something none of them could have prepared for. Blood-stained, the forest floor like dark rubies against the green moss. The injured bear's trail was clear, but something about its path troubled the hunters. Instead of seeking a safe haven to nurse its wounds, the bear was moving with purpose, following what seemed to be a predetermined route through the wilderness. The afternoon sky darkened as heavy clouds rolled in from the mountains. The temperature dropped sharply, and the first drops of cold rain began to fall. The forest transformed around them, turning the ground into treacherous mud and making the blood trail harder to follow. The rain would soon wash away their only means of tracking their quarry. Sarah studied the tracks with growing concern. Despite its injuries, the bear maintained a steady pace. More disturbing was how it alternated between deep and light prints, as if deliberately trying to confuse its pursuers. When the trail seemed to vanish, they would find it again several yards away, behind natural barriers or crossing streams where the blood would be harder to spot. The rain intensified, drumming against the canopy above. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by the low rumble of thunder. The hunters pushed forward, their clothes now soaked through. The weather seemed to be working in the bear's favor, but they couldn't turn back. An injured predator of this size posed an even greater threat to nearby communities. As they followed the trail, Mike noticed something unusual about their surroundings. The bear was leading them through the most challenging terrain possible. It chose paths that forced them to climb steep slopes, cross rushing streams, and navigate dense thickets. Each obstacle slowed their pursuit, while the bear, even wounded, could move through them with relative ease. 4 hours into the pursuit, they made a shocking discovery. The trail led them to an old ranger station, long abandoned by the forestry service. The building's walls bore deep claw marks, but these were old, weathered by years of exposure. Tom found tattered logbooks inside, their pages yellow with age. The records told a disturbing story. 10 years ago, this same bear had been caught in a series of steel traps set by poachers. Instead of dying, it had learned from the experience. The rangers documented how it began dismantling traps before they could spring, using techniques that showed remarkable problem-solving abilities. Over time, the bear had developed an understanding of human weapons and tactics. It wasn't just surviving, it was adapting and evolving. The rain continued to pour as they studied the station's records. Reports described how the bear had started marking territories in ways that seemed purposeful, using patterns that went beyond normal animal behavior. It had been observed watching, hunting parties from concealed positions, learning their movements and strategies. The bear had transformed from prey into something else entirely. A crash of thunder made them all jump. Through the station's grimy windows, they saw the forest had become a maze of shadows and rain. Visibility was down to mere yards. The bear's blood trail, their only guide, was quickly disappearing in the downpour. Doubt began to creep into their minds. Were they still the hunters, or had they become the hunted? Sarah pointed out another troubling detail in the tracks around the station. The bear had circled the building several times before moving on, as if it was familiar with the location. The tracks showed it had even attempted to open the station's door, standing upright and using its claws with disturbing precision. The group's earlier confidence had evaporated like morning mist. They were dealing with a creature that had spent years studying its human adversaries. Each encounter had made it smarter, more cautious, and more dangerous. The bullets they had put into it might only serve to make it more determined. Lightning illuminated the forest in stark flashes, creating disorienting shadows that seemed to move. The wind carried strange sounds, mixing with the thunder until they could no longer tell what was natural and what might be their quarry. The bear's trail now led them toward the mountain's higher elevations, where the storm's fury was even more intense. As they climbed, they found more signs of the bear's intelligence. Small caves and dens dotted the mountainside, each showing evidence of use. The bear had created a network of shelters, giving it safe places to rest and observe. Some contained stored food, others showed signs of regular maintenance. This was not random animal behavior. This was strategic thinking. The rain finally began to ease, but darkness was approaching. The hunters had to make a decision. Continuing in the dark meant exposing themselves to unnecessary risks, but stopping meant giving the injured bear time to recover or possibly circle back behind them. The bear had demonstrated enough tactical awareness to make either choice dangerous. Tom found the latest blood marks, showing the bear was still moving upward. But something about the trail had changed. The spacing between prints was different, more deliberate. The bear was no longer just fleeing. It was leading them somewhere. The fading light cast long shadows through the trees as the hunters faced their growing uncertainty. They had come prepared to hunt a dangerous animal, but now they found themselves tracking something that seemed to be several steps ahead of them. The bear's wounds didn't appear to be slowing it down. Instead, they might have pushed it to become even more cunning. As night approached, they could feel unseen eyes watching them from the darkness. The mountain itself seemed to have taken the bear's side, offering it countless places to hide while leaving them exposed. They were about to enter the most dangerous phase of their hunt, where one wrong decision could prove fatal. The last traces of daylight faded from the mountain sky as the hunters finally caught sight of their quarry. The massive bear had taken refuge in a natural stone alcove, partially hidden by fallen logs and thick vegetation. Blood marks on nearby rocks confirmed this was no temporary rest stop. The injured creature had chosen its ground carefully. Jack signaled the team to spread out quietly. Years of hunting experience guided their movements as they encircled the alcove. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the trees, masking their footsteps as they moved into position. The bear remained motionless, its dark form barely visible in the growing darkness. Sarah took the high ground, positioning herself on a rocky outcrop that overlooked the alcove. The Walker brothers moved to either side, using the thick tree trunks for cover. Mike circled to cut off any escape route toward the valley below, while Jack maintained his position with a clear shot at the bear's vital areas. The hunters switched on their rifle-mounted lights in perfect synchronization, flooding the alcove with harsh white beams. The bear was larger than they remembered from their earlier encounter, its wet fur glistening in the artificial light. Blood matted its right side where their bullets had found their mark, but the creature showed no signs of weakness. Something about the scene felt wrong. The bear's choice of location was too perfect, offering it protection from behind while giving it a clear view of all approaching angles. More disturbing was its behavior. Despite being surrounded, it showed no signs of panic or aggression. Its eyes moved from hunter to hunter, studying their positions with unsettling intelligence. Jack gave the signal to tighten the circle. They moved forward in practiced unison, their rifles trained on the massive target. The bear watched their approach, its breathing steady and controlled. Unlike their previous encounter, there was no roaring, no display of aggression. The creature's calm demeanor sent chills down their spines. The distance closed to 30 yards. In the bright beams of their lights, they could see details they had missed before. The old scar on its flank was not from a random injury. It formed a distinct pattern, almost like a healed trap wound. This bear had not just survived previous encounters with humans, it had learned from them. 20 yards. The ground around the alcove showed signs of recent activity, but something was off about the tracks. They overlapped in strange patterns, as if the bear had been pacing in specific routes, testing different angles. The vegetation wasn't randomly trampled. Some areas were deliberately cleared, while others were left untouched. 15 yards. Sarah's voice crackled over their radio headsets, barely above a whisper. The rocks above the alcove showed scratch marks that seemed too regular, too purposeful. They formed a pattern that none of them had seen before in all their years of hunting. The bear had marked this place, but not in any way they understood. 10 yards. The air grew thick with tension. Their lights caught the bear's eyes, which showed neither fear nor rage. Instead, they reflected an awareness that made the hunter's fingers tighten on their triggers. The creature remained still, almost too still, as if waiting for something. 5 yards. Close enough now to hear the bear's breathing, steady and controlled. The hunters had it completely surrounded. There was no escape route, no path to safety. By all normal measures, they had won. The hunt should have been over. But nothing about this hunt had been normal. The bear's calmness in the face of certain death disturbed them deeply. Its posture suggested not resignation, but readiness. Even trapped, even injured, it maintained an air of control that defied their understanding of wild animals. A cold wind whipped through the trees, carrying with it an unusual silence. No birds called. No small animals rustled in the underbrush. The forest itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something the hunters couldn't yet see. The bear's eyes moved once more between them, measuring, calculating. In those dark depths, they saw something that shook their confidence to its core. This was not the desperate last stand of a cornered animal. This was something else entirely, something that made their victory feel suddenly hollow. They had the bear surrounded, but in their hearts a chilling certainty began to grow. They weren't the ones in control of this situation. They never had been. The first sign that something extraordinary was about to happen came from the forest itself. A sudden rustle moved through the underbrush, different from the wind. Small animals, usually hidden from sight, began emerging from their shelters. Squirrels crept down tree trunks, their usual skittish behavior replaced by purposeful movement. Deer, which normally fled from human presence, stepped quietly into the clearing. The hunters maintained their positions around the bear, but their attention wavered as more animals gathered. Foxes slipped between the trees and rabbits hopped into view, showing no fear. The forest creatures formed an outer circle around the hunters, their presence creating an atmosphere that felt almost ceremonial. The surrounded bear remained unnaturally calm, its eyes now focused on something beyond the hunters. A soft sound echoed from deeper in the forest, barely audible but distinct. The sound grew closer, accompanied by the gentle cracking of twigs and rustling of leaves. From the darkness emerged two small shapes, their movements uncertain but determined. Bear, cubs, small, vulnerable, and surprisingly graceful. They padded toward the injured bear, navigating between the hunters with uncanny awareness. The reality of the situation struck the hunters like a physical blow. They had been tracking a mother bear, one who had led them on an elaborate chase not to save herself, but to keep them away from her cubs. The cubs approached their mother, who still had not moved from her position. Her earlier behavior suddenly made perfect sense. The strategic retreat, the complex path through the forest, the choice of this particular location. Every decision had been calculated to protect her young while keeping the hunters occupied, as if orchestrated by an unseen force, the gathering darkness was suddenly pierced by the aurora borealis. Sheets of green and purple light danced across the sky, illuminating the scene in an otherworldly glow. The natural phenomenon painted the forest in shifting colors, transforming the mundane into the magical. Under this celestial light show, the mother bear finally moved. Instead of attacking or trying to escape, she rose to her full height with deliberate slowness. Her cubs pressed against her legs, but showed no fear. The blood from her wounds glistened in the aurora's light, yet she stood straight and proud. The gathered forest animals remained in their circle, silent witnesses to the unfolding scene. The mother bear's eyes met each hunter's gaze in turn, conveying something that transcended the normal boundaries between human and animal. In those eyes, they saw not just intelligence but wisdom, not just instinct, but love. Sarah was the first to lower her rifle. The action seemed to break a spell, and the others slowly followed suit. The bear's cubs, emboldened by the hunters, began tending to their mother's wounds, licking the injured areas with gentle care. Their behavior displayed a level of awareness and compassion that challenged everything the hunters thought they knew about these creatures. The aurora's light intensified, creating a natural spotlight on the family of bears. The mother bear, then, did something that would forever change the hunters' understanding of wildlife. She deliberately sat down, positioning herself to better allow her cubs to help her, while keeping a protective watch over them. This simple act of trust and vulnerability in their presence struck deeper than any bullet could have. More animals emerged from the forest. Birds settled on nearby branches, their usual evening songs replaced by respectful silence. A pair of wolves appeared at the edge of the clearing, not as predators, but as respectful observers. The scene before them had transformed from a hunt into something sacred, a glimpse into the true nature of the forest and its inhabitants. The hunters witnessed the cubs working together to tend to their mother, displaying problem-solving skills that went far beyond instinct. One cub gathered specific leaves known for their healing properties, while the other helped clean the wounds. Their coordination and intelligence suggested a level of sophistication that science had never documented. Jack, the veteran hunter who had started this pursuit, felt tears forming in his eyes. In 30 years of hunting, he had never seen anything like this. The bear they had been trying to kill was not just a dangerous predator, but a thinking, feeling being with a family and a purpose. Her raids on human settlements took on new meaning. She had not been attacking out of aggression, but out of necessity to feed and protect her young. The aurora's ethereal light began to fade, but its effect on the hunters remained. They had entered these woods seeking to eliminate a threat, but instead found themselves witnesses to something miraculous. The boundary between human and animal, predator and prey, hunter and hunted, had dissolved in this extraordinary moment. The mother bear stood once again, her cubs at her side. She made no move to escape or attack. Instead, she faced the hunters one final time, her expression carrying a dignity that would haunt their memories forever. In that moment, each hunter felt a profound shift in their understanding of the natural world and their place in it. The gathered animals began to disperse, melting back into the forest as quietly as they had appeared. The wolves were the last to leave, their departure marking the end of this unprecedented gathering. The mother bear and her cubs remained, as if waiting for the hunters to make the next move. In the newfound silence, their decision was unanimous and unspoken. The hunt was over, but not in the way any of them had expected. They had come to these woods as hunters but would leave as protectors, forever changed by what they had witnessed. The following morning dawned clear and bright, but the world looked different to the 5 hunters who emerged from the forest. They carried their rifles unloaded, a physical symbol of the profound change that had taken place in their hearts. The events of the previous night had transformed them in ways they were only beginning to understand. Their first stop was the local ranger station, where they shared their extraordinary experience. Instead of reporting a successful hunt, they described the intelligence and compassion they had witnessed. They spoke of the mother bear's strategic thinking, her dedication to her cubs, and the mysterious gathering of forest animals under the dancing lights of the aurora. The hunters made a decision that would reshape the future of Pine Valley. Together, they proposed a new wildlife protection zone around the area where they had encountered the bear family. Jack, with his decades of hunting experience, became the most passionate advocate for changing how the community dealt with wildlife conflicts. Sarah used her background in wildlife research to document their observations. Her detailed reports of the bear's problem-solving abilities and social behavior attracted attention from scientists and conservation experts. What they had witnessed challenged existing understanding of animal intelligence and sparked new research into bear behavior. The local community's initial skepticism turned to interest as the hunters shared their story. The same people who had once demanded the bear's removal now worked to understand and coexist with these remarkable creatures. Farmers began implementing new humane methods to protect their livestock, using deterrents that respected both human needs and wildlife safety. Mike, the former forest ranger, developed educational programs for schools, teaching children about wildlife behavior and conservation. The story of the mother bear and her cubs became a powerful lesson about the complexity and intelligence of animals. Students learned that what humans often perceived as aggression was usually just wildlife trying to survive and protect their young. The Walker brothers turned their hunting skills toward wildlife photography and tracking. Their intimate knowledge of the forest helped them document the bear family from a safe distance. Their photos revealed more extraordinary behavior, showing how the mother bear taught her cubs survival skills, including ways to avoid conflict with humans. The bears themselves remained in the area, but raids on human settlements stopped completely. As if understanding the change in human attitude, the mother bear kept her family deep in the forest, only occasionally visible to respectful observers. The cubs grew stronger each day, their presence a reminder of the night that changed everything. Word of what happened spread beyond Pine Valley. Other communities facing wildlife conflicts began to rethink their approach. The hunters found themselves invited to share their experience at conservation conferences. their story offering a powerful testament to the possibility of coexistence between humans and wildlife. 1 year after that extraordinary night, Pine Valley celebrated its first Wildlife Awareness Festival. The event honored not just the bears, but all forest creatures. The festival became an annual tradition, drawing visitors from across the country to learn about wildlife conservation and responsible forest management. The deeper message of their experience echoed far beyond their small community. It showed that true strength lies not in domination, but in understanding. The hunters had entered the forest seeking to eliminate a threat, but discovered instead the profound intelligence and emotional complexity of the creatures sharing our world. Their story became a reminder that nature holds mysteries we are only beginning to understand. The mother bear and her cubs had taught them that animals are not simply creatures to be feared or controlled, but beings worthy of respect and protection. In choosing to lower their rifles that night, the hunters had raised humanity's awareness of our responsibility to protect and preserve the natural world. As Pine Valley thrived under its new approach to wildlife conservation, the aurora would sometimes return, painting the sky in brilliant colors. During these moments, those who knew the story would pause and remember the night when 5 hunters discovered that the most powerful shot they could take was the one they chose not to. Want to experience more incredible wildlife stories that will touch your heart and change your perspective? Subscribe to our channel, where we bring you amazing true stories of human-animal encounters every week. Hit that subscribe button and bell icon now to join our growing community of nature lovers, and never miss an extraordinary tale from the wild.